Yutes is begematria chave. And Tevis is all about action. Right? Aguf nenem and aguf. Shem Havai is 26. Shem Havai b'milue is 45. The difference is 19. That's his chave. That's the literal source of behind every man there's a woman. It's a metzias. The gematrias don't lie. Now, of course, gematrias are only true when they have a teichen pnimi. The Rebbe said, "Ein adam doirish gematria meyatzme," even though it's a very popular business. So it's chaydish. It's chave of Tevis, and the Indian of Tevis is the fourth month. The fourth month is action. The third month is Teira, Kislev, Sivan, and the fourth month, Tevis and Tammuz, is action. And when the Rebbe brings in the Siches that the Gemara says about Chaydish Tevis, Yerach shaguf nenem en aguf, and he explains that the guf goes on the Eibishter and the guf goes on Yidden's Gashmias. So the Rebbe has a Siches based on a Zion, Pashas Chayi Sora, that Sora is the guf and Avram is the Neshama. So the math stims, right? The Pel Mamish is the Gula Amitis Vashleimai, the Mashiach Tzidkenu, Begashmias Kipshute, like the Rebbe Marash told in Tzemach Tzedek, Ruchni is the Mashiach, and say a Geschmack, aber vom ein Gashmias the Mashiach was always lesen the ganze Welt. Okay, we're learning Tanya, Rabbi say. We always learn Tanya. On Sundays, learning Tanya. Now, last week, we started Perek Zayin, chapter 16. So, we started Perek Zayin last week. And as I told you last week, in this Perek you have an unusual feature, which I don't know if it appears any place else in the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe uses the word Klal Godel, a great principle, Klal Godel, and he says it twice. The first line of the Perek, the second word and the third word of the Perek are Klal Godel. If you scoot down 10 lines, the last words on the line are again Klal Godel. 9 lines on top, Klal Godel. In this Perek, the Alter Rebbe introduces us two Klal Godels in Tanya. And I told you, the Rebbe used to say that there's a Prat, there's a Klal Stam, then there's a Klal Godel, and then there's Kol HaTorah Kula. Perek Tezayin, chapter 16, which is page 22 in the numbers. Chafal Hamid Beis.
42.
Page 42, I'm sorry. Again, I don't want to get into this whole thing, but that's the Rebbe explains in the Sikha the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Hillel. Rabbi Akiva says, "V'yav karech bech is klal godel b'teira," because it's only half of Yiddishkeit. Bein odom lamokim, bein odom lachaveri. The other half of Yiddishkeit is bein odom lamokim, is v'havta savaya lekecha, like it says in Tanya Perek Daled, that the kiyum of all the mitzvahs asay is Avos Yisrael, is Avos Hashem. Hillel says Kol HaTorah Kula, which is a higher madreg, and of course the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is trying to figure out what v'havta l'rech kamecha has to do with shatnez and with other delectable mitzvahs that only the Eibishter cares about, klayochel, what they mean, and how the Rashi says, because the Eibishter is also your friend. The Eibishter is your friend. But in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe gives a different explanation. So that's the idea. There's a prat, there's a specific, there's a cloud, there's a category, and then there's a klal godel, a very broad category. It's not kol HaTorah kula, but it's a klal godel. So in chapter 16, you have 2 klal godels. And the first klal godel we learned last week. And the toichen was that the point of the Beinani is meyach shalt al alev. The point of the Bein, if you look in the word, second line, lim shel v'lishleit ala teva asher b'chol al asmali, to dominate, to rule over the teva, the nature, which is the left ventricle of the heart, using the avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. In other words, in Perek Tezvav, in chapter 15, which we completed 2 weeks ago, we talked about Aveda Tama LeBeinani. The highest levels of Beinani, if you remember, there's Loy Avodah, and then there's Avodah. There's Avodah, he reveals his Teva, and there's Avodah, he uses Seichel to create original. In other words, emotions that are not consistent with the nature of the person. They're beyond the Teva HaAdam, and nevertheless the person is able to be Ma'oider. Such feelings, it's the Madreg of Elam Abriya. Teva is Elam HaYetzirah. To reveal emotions based on your personality is Elam HaYetzirah. To create original emotions through your mind is the Madreg of Elam Abriya. The point of all of these lofty levels of Avodah Lekim, as opposed to Lei Avodah, of moyach shalat ala leiv, where the mind educates the heart, right? That's the deeper meaning of the word moyach shalat. I told this to you many times, that it says in the first Maim in Hepsh Chaim Beis, that moyach shalat ala leiv means to teach. But moyach shalat ala leiv means to teach when the Beinani is davening. The rest of the day, moyach shalat ala leiv means to control, to dominate. How does the Beinani control his leiv a whole day? Based on the education that his mind gave his heart during davening. You understand? The education the mind gives the heart during davening is the basis for the control that you have all day long. So this is the Klal Gadol. The Klal Gadol is there are Beinanim who are on incredibly high levels. Such high levels that first of all we call them Madregas HaBeinani. And if you can recall the meaning of the words Madregas HaBeinani, that this is not just something that he does, this is a status, this is a station. Right? Just like a tzaddik is a madrega, there's a bein that's madrega. And if you can remember the brainwashing that I give, I repeat the same things over and over again. I'm not saying it sarcastically, but it's because I want the nekuda to be crystal clear. This is based on the Ha'aron that Rebbe is Rishimis. Melucho memshala. Madregas HaBeinani is an alternating between Melucha and Memshala, sometimes Melech and sometimes Moishel, sometimes Melech and sometimes Moishel. That combination creates Madregas HaBeinani. And in Madregas HaBeinani itself, we're dealing with a person who's Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem behis galus. That he contemplates he learns about Elokus, he contemplates Elokus until he develops absolute regesh, emotional feelings for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And I told you the Maaseh with the Pshilim, that the Pshilim was davening. The Pshilim was one of the Tmimim. And the Rebbe Rashab walked into the Cheder Sheni, what they call the Chabadnitzer, to say Yeshe B'Seiser after a Levaya. And you're supposed to say it 7 times. So he basically circled him. You know, if a person is standing in the middle of a box, and you want to circle him, there's 8 spots you could sit. 3 in front of him, 3 behind him, and 1 on either side. That's 8. He sat in 7 of the 8 spots, and the Pshilim's eyes were open, and he didn't see the Rebbe. So the Rebbe Nishma said when he finished, V'zuhi Aveda Tama LeBeinani. What it says here, this is the Aveda Tama, the consummate Beinani, the whole Beinani, the perfect Beinani, or the Lashon that the Rebbe brings, Avoida She'ein Acharei Avoida. He makes one more step. He's a Madregas Tzaddik. Aveda Tama LeBeinani, the highest Madrega Beinani that can be, full revealed Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And like I said to you, this is the Madrega of the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim and the Gdei Chassidei Tzemach Tzedek. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim all are Ava V'Yireh. The Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek, the greatest ones, you know, Yidden like Rabbi Yeshaber, V'Kayetze, the Rashbatz, then gewend im gehalten bei Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. By the Rebbe Rashab, I told this to you already, that Reb Greinim said to the Rebbe Rashab by Fabrengen. It's hard to know whether the Rashab agreed with him or not. But mir zan Hashem gewend, am hab nicht genau Ava V'Yireh. Reb Greinim was so mashpia in Lubavitch. He was mashpia b'shem ha'toyer. He really was. You speak to all. I never met these people. You read the Rishimis of all the Chassidim went to Lubavitch. He was the mashpia b'hei ha'yediyah. He wasn't the tzir. He was the mashpia. The tzir was Reb Hendel. The tzir was Rashbatz. The tzir was Reb Cholder Alter. The tzir was the given eine. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. He was from the Gor Goheben the Greis Chassidim in Lubavitch. He was a mashpia, a madich in Lubavitch. But the mashpia, the one who taught Chassidus, who taught, they should understand. The one who gave over the Messiah, the Teirah Shabbat, the Sipurei Chassidim that we have, that are not from the Friedrich Rebbe directly, 90% of them we are hearing from the Talmidim of Greinim, who heard them from him, and they all write it. Falakan and the Haraf Pelov and Zalman Duchman. Zalman Duchman was the Kabbal from Mezede, the Mordechayel, but he was also a Kabbal from the Greinim. And all of them, Chitrik's a little bit younger, Yudel Chitrik, Olav Shalom, they were all the Greinim's Talmidim. So Greinim said to the Rebbe Rashab, it's printed in the Teirah Shalom. We're already used to the fact we don't have Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. I forgot what the Rebbe's answer was. I'm not sure the Rebbe would necessarily agree. But I told you, I told you the story with David HaRadakir. I'm repeating a speech that I gave you already in a previous class. But Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, Ava V'Yireh is a high madrega. The truth is Ava V'Yireh is madrega is tzaddik. But by a tzaddik, when you turn it on, it stays on. By the Beinani, you turn it on, and then it can go off. Because he needs to motivate it, he needs to fuel it. Because there's a Yetzer Hara which is schlepping him in the opposite direction. I mean, when I was in yeshiva, I probably told this to you already. When I was in yeshiva, Mashpiyim V'Gzog HaMoshel, I probably heard it from Reb Melech, Olav Shalom. Zechreini Levrocha. I mean it, Zechreini Levrocha. That the moshel of the rich man and the poor man. You've heard this moshel before. Chassidim say this moshel by Fabrenganish. That's how they teach the Bachim. The rich man has a shed full of wood. And the wood is dry and treated, and it's been sitting away from moisture for a year in a very, very well fortified shed. You put a piece of wood like that on a fire, in minutes it's burning. The poor man doesn't have a shed full of wood, and even if he does, it's moist. And he goes out collecting whatever he can find, twigs and leaves and garbage. And his fire is not so beautiful. His fire is smoky and smelly, and he doesn't have enough of it. He doesn't have enough of it. A rich man has every hour, he puts on one log, and the house remains temperate. It's always the same temperature. The poor man puts on every hour one log. By midday, he has no more fuel. His house is freezing. So all the fuel he has, he puts in the fire in the morning. All of it. And the house is hot. But they try to keep the windows and doors closed as much as possible. And because in the morning it was so very hot, later in the day there's some heat left. It's a different philosophy. It's the poor man's philosophy versus the rich man's philosophy. And the Nimshalas, this is the difference between the tzaddik and the Beinani. The tzaddik is able to keep the fire fueled with a certain temperature. Why? He doesn't have Yetzer Hara. He has nothing to say, try something else. He doesn't have the same Nisayan. He's in a different Ma'amid Matzah. There's a different expectation. Tzaddikim are expected to be Mesa Nefesh in their regular daily avodah. But the Beinani has a Yetzer Hara, even if he's in a Madregas Beinani. And when he stops fueling the fire, the moisture immediately starts to cool him down. And that's why you have this phenomenon called Melucha Memshala. So the highest Beinani has to know that the point of it all is Shalit Ala Lev. That's what I said last week. The point is that it translates into behavioral action. That Chach Afilu, even though we're talking about incredibly high levels, we are talking about very, very high levels. Avodah Tamo and Madregas HaBeinani. But the Klal Gadol is, the point of every Beinani is that it should translate into action. The Raya that a Beinani is a Yid the way he's supposed to be is not how much love he has for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but how much mastery he has over his goof. And this is really Yiddishkeit. This is really the Nekuda, the whole of Yiddishkeit. The test of one's Ruchnius is the way their feet are on the ground. Asiya, and it's a big test. For some people, they're very Ruchniistic, they're very spiritual. And they love the experience of understanding and even feeling a lakus. But when it comes to managing the Yetzer Hara, this is not part of their nature. It's not part of their chush. You know, it's tedious, it's technical, it's, how do the teenagers say it? It's boring. Yeah, ever speak to teenagers? It's boring. What's boring? Everything is boring except what makes me crazy and you crazy. Yeah, it's boring. But that's the Torah says, that's the criteria. So, since we said Klal Gadol 1, now we're ready to move on to Klal Gadol 2, or the way I told it to you last week, and I'm making this up. I really am making this up. Why are the first 9 lines of Perek Tezayin in this Perek and not in the Perek before? L'chayda, the first 9 lines, which is talking about the Beinani who has full Ava V'Yira based on a deep hisbonenus, it should be in the Perek before, which spoke about Eved Elokim and Avodah Tama. Why is it here? Because in this Perek, the Alter Rebbe says the measure of the Beinani is the feelings are very important, but the point of the feelings is the Moyach Shalt Al Bepel, the actual master of a mind and heart, an action, arms and legs. Can I share Basi Legani what with you? I went on this weekend. Yeah, the one thing I had from this weekend, I had no hischayvesen to anybody but the girls. So I started to the Basi Legani Tavshachaf Aleph. It's torture. It's so difficult. It's 2 of them. Long, difficult by Morim. So I just want to share with you what how the Rebbe spins things.
What paragraph is it?
Yud Aleph, this year. It's 40 pages of Chassidus Mustame, and I learned 35. So one of the Verte that the Rebbe says is that it says in Medrash, Lefi ma sayani nikra. This is a Basi Legani word. It says, Lefi ma sayani nikra. That what is the Eibishter's name? Right? Our other Marishan's name is Kach V'Kach. Chava's name at Nageret, her name is Chava, and so on. What's the Eibishter's name? The Eibishter says, Lefi ma sayani nikra, my name is based on my asiyah, based on my mais. So when you learn this in most Chassidus, what is the meaning of V'himaisi ani nikra? It means Hashem himself doesn't have a name. Because Hashem is higher than a name. Because the name is a definition, Hashem is beyond definition. The names of the Eibishter describe the Midas. The Midas of Atzilus. That when the Eibishter is doing Chesed, he's called Kel. He's doing Gvura, he's called Elokim. So V'himaisi ani nikra means the Midah, the Midah through which the Eibush is mashpi in the world, when the Eibush is doing Mulchama against Seinei Yisrael, Seinei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's called Tzvokes. That's what the Maimon is about, yeah? But the Rebbe spins it different. He says there is Sfiras of Atzilus, there's Midas of Atzilus. And then there's Ani. Who's Ani? Ani is Atzmus Samhus, the Eibishter himself, who's higher than the Midas and the Sfiras of Atzilus. Ani Nikra. When are you Mamshech Ani? Lefi Masay, when I'm doing an Asiyah. Not when I'm doing a Dibur. Not when I'm doing a Machshava. Dafka when I'm doing an Asiyah. And the Rebbe teaches, what is the meaning of Asiyah? Just like by a person. It's a Uman Tzayid of Kli. It becomes separate from the one doing the action. Kayocha by the Eibishter, a Maisa by the Eibishter, when he involves himself in something which appears separate from him. So the Rebbe spins it a whole nother way. Lefi Masay Ani Nikra. You want to reach Ani, you want to go higher than the Shemis, and bring Mamshech into the Sfiras of Atzilus. Ani, it's in Asiyah. It's a whole nother Chassidus. It's not how the Tzemach Tzedek explains it in Sherish Mitzvah Tefillah when he talks about the idea of the Midas and the Sfiras and Achtos and Ala Kashas. It's a different Inyan. This is the Rebbe for you. Anyway, the Nekuda is that by the Eibush is the same thing. That by the Eibush, the deepest Inyan is when it comes in Asiyah B'Payil. And the whole of Yiddishkeit says that the measure of everything is in actions. Yisur Meran Asei Tev. That's the first Klal Gadol. You're holding by a very high level of Abbas Hashem and Yiddus Hashem. You're a Beinani on the highest Madrigas. And the Klal Gadol says the point of this is that I should learn Torah and do mitzvahs B'Peil Mamish and not do Avedas. So in that light, we continue now when we read V'yeser al Kain. In addition to this, Tzarech the Klal Gadol, you have to know a second Klal Gadol. Ba'aveda lebeinim, the work of Abeinim. And again, the way we're going to learn this is that whereas last week, the first part of Perek Tezayin, we're discussing the highest imaginable Beinani. And we're saying that the Ikir Kala Ikrim, the most important aspect of his incredible spiritual level, is his Maaseh, his action. It segues into a Beinani on a lower Madreg. And the Alter Rebbe begins. Shagam im ein yad sichle, if the hand of one's wisdom, v'ruach binasei, and the spirit of one's understanding, is not long enough to maseges, to reach, lahoilit, to birth, avas Hashem behis galosli, be love of God Almighty, that it be revealed in the heart. And the Alter Rebbe translates, sheyihi libi be'eh, that one's heart should be engulfed, should be inflamed. Like a fire which has a certain heat because it's attached to rishapeh. Rishpeh means a hot coal. The chafetz and the chafetz and the desire, bechafetza, bechasheko, tshuka, with a desire and a longing and a thirst. Morgeshes, which is pronounced and felt. Belev in one's heart, ledov kabei, to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're dealing here with a lesser Beinani. He's able to learn and he's able to think. But he's not able to turn over the engine. There's when you have an air conditioner, there's what is it called inside the air conditioner and inside the freezer? A compressor. And you got to turn the compressor over. Then the engine is on. You put on the air conditioner, the compressor doesn't go on. It's blowing air, but it's not cold. Or you're blowing air, and it's not hot. A person has a compressor that translates what the Mayach understands into feelings of the Lev. What if the compressor doesn't go on? He did all the work. He did the learning, he did the meditating, and the Ava V'yira does not become revealed. Rak, instead, Ava Misuteres, the love remains hidden. V'moichai, in his mind, V'talumais libay, and in the hidden recesses of his heart. The Hainu, I'll tell you what I mean. Sha'alev Maven, this person is intelligent enough to understand, and you understand that the word Bino also is connected to his bonaras. He not just understands, but he's able to think, he can concentrate. Beruach chochma ubina, with the spirit of wisdom and understanding in his brain. Gedula saying say baruch on the greatness of Elokus. He understands it well. The kulak make lochshiv mamish, that everything next to the Eibishter is klar. He understands it well, and he puts in the time. He's not lazy. He learns and he contemplates. But then, for whatever reason, it remains hidden. Says the Rebbe, Asher al Kain, accordingly, Yas Aloi. Yas Aloi means it would be correct. As past. He deserves. It's worthy. Yizbarech to the Eibishter deserves. Shetichle love nefesh kol choy, that the soul of every person should expire, should be going out of itself. Lidavek v'lihikolel b'yodei, to achieve a dveikus. Whatever the word dveikus means, and an includedness, be'edei and the Eibishter's oyed. And so far he mentioned, what did he say? Nefesh. V'gam nefshei v'ruche shebekir bei. Not just is the Eibishter worthy that I should love him, I'm worthy that I should love him also. The person's nefesh and ruach, kach yasal lahen, they also deserve. Es is recht, it is correct that the person should experience liyes kol say love, to be expiring, going out of oneself, to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'chasheka v'chafitza, with a longing and a desire, lotzeis min taken to leave the concealment of the sheath. Top of page Chav Beis now. Who haguf, which is the body, the dovke, bay, to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's not happening. The neshama is forced to live. Inside a body, and in this person, he's bound up, he's trapped in it. Like a living widow. He knows he has a husband. She knows she has a husband, and she can't get to him. So she's called an almona chaya. V'leis machshava dilhein tfisa bei klal. No keli can hold HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he is worthy, considering the effort that he invests, to have avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. But he doesn't. He doesn't. And this Rabbi says, the second, yours are stopping in the middle of a sentence. We'll continue the sentence next week. This is what we're going to learn today. We're dealing with a person who's a serious servant of Hashem, a serious worker. He's not lazy. So he thinks, he learns, and he tries to understand. And after he learns and tries to understand, he contemplates. But the compressor doesn't turn on. The engine doesn't turn over. You put a key into a car and it's cold, yeah? You sit and you sit and you sit and you push gas. The engine doesn't turn over. He has no Avos Hashem Yiras Hashem. And the Rebbe says twice the word Yossi. And later on this page, the Rebbe is going to say a third time the word Yossi. It will say Yossi. But this we're going to say for later. Yossi means it would be right. Yossi means it is just. It is correct. In a world of fairness, it would be. But it isn't. Why are there two Yossas? Because there's a Yossa for the Eibishter and there's a Yossa for the Yid. Yossa, the Eibishter deserves to be loved, to be desired, considering how much the Eibishter is the reason for our existence. And Yossa, the person deserves to be desirous of the Eibishter, considering how hard he's working. And it's not happening. Why? He's stuck in a goof. Now, I never do this, but this time I'm going to do it. Let's read the footnote. Okay, read a little Kabbalah. Okay, just for the morning, in case we all think that we're too stuck in Elam Hazeh, let's read a footnote and we'll start to float. V'hasiba lazeh. And the reason this person learns about the Eibishter and contemplates about the Eibishter, and Yasa Leiv Lahem, right? The Eibishter deserves and the person deserves that the compressor should turn on, that the engine should turn over, that there should be full feelings of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and it's not happening. Because this person's innards, v'naran shalei, and this person's nefesh, ruach, and neshana, bebechinas ibur. They're in a state of pregnancy, v'helam, and they're hidden teichatfuna, inside understanding. V'loi bebechinas leida v'hizgalus. They're not born, and they're not revealed. Kidur le'yedechein, as it's known to all people who know members of the Chein family. Yeah, chochma nestara, pnimiyas hatera, seidas hatera. It's poshet, not his fault. That's the word. It's poshet, not his fault. The Eibishter did not give him the neshama to avava v'yir. The Eibishter gave him the neshama to be able to learn. The Eibishter gave him the neshama to be able to think. And you'll see in Perikut Ches, there's some people who can't even learn. And there's some people who can learn that can concentrate. This fellow can learn. This fellow can concentrate. But because of the nature of the way his neshama is curled up, he's unable to feel. In other words, it's not because of laziness. It's not if he would try harder. The Eibusha did not give him the edelkeit, the sensitivity for ruchnis nelakus, that he should be able to respond this way. And the Ahava v'yira don't happen. Now, what's going to be the punchline? What's going to be the punchline of this conversation? The punch of this conversation is going to be, what do you do? What are you doing? Right? What was the first klal gadol? That you're dealing with the beinin, the maximum madreg of Ava v'yira, and you say, hey, tell me a bottom line. Machshava dibur u'maisa. Sur miran asay teif. I forgot who told this to me. But a Chassidish Yid was talking to me rather emotionally about this krichen in Himmel, that we fantasize, we imagine ourselves holding at very high levels. So he told me, I asked Mendel Marozov, how was it when he was growing up? He said, so Mendel answered in very posh, it was haste. The Chassidus, the Fabrengen, was simply to be a balabayas over yourself, not to think what you're not supposed to think, and to think what you are supposed to think, not to say what you're not supposed to say, and say what you are supposed to say, not to do what you're not supposed to do, and yes to do what you're supposed to do. And so he said, we didn't know, in other words, the hadracha, the chinuch, the ashpah that they got, and the Mendel is after Lubavitch. The Mendel is the Deir Adomim, the Mendel is the next in Chonya's younger sons, right? He wasn't Mamish the youngest, but he was one of the younger children. He's from the second marriage. He didn't learn. He doesn't remember Lubavitch. He may have been born in Lubavitch, but he doesn't remember Lubavitch. Maybe he wasn't even born in Lubavitch. But he says, if the hadracha was machshava dibur ma'isa, should be a balabayas over my thought, speech, and action. This is the ganze chassidus, that a person should be a balabayas, right? So the Rebbe says, in the first 9 lines of this page, we talked about it, Ben is in a very high level, and he's experiencing Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. The klal gadol is, what does it translate into practically? So the Rebbe says, therefore you have a second klal gadol, that if the Benyani is unable to turn over his engine, and to experience Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, there's going to be a whole pedic. It's going to make one point. If a human being makes the efforts that a Benyani is supposed to make, and he gets stuck at some point, he doesn't carry it through. The dominoes don't fall. It doesn't go from learning to thinking to feeling to acting. There's obstructions, there's problems, there's blockages. If in the final analysis he doesn't do an Aved and he does mitzvahs, that's a Benyani. And that's the second klal gadol, that the point is the bottom line. If a person gets, for whatever reasons, there's alamas ve'estadim that don't allow it to trickle down, A, B, C, D, E, if the end result is there, that's the raya that his efforts have borne fruit. That's what this pedic is going to say. Okay, now, let me tell you the mice. I'm not even going to say, oh mice, I'm going to say the mice, because I'm always telling you this mice. This is one of the stories that I always repeat in this context. I taught Perek Tezayin to Bochrim for many years. So every time I taught this, we got in this Perek, I would tell them this mice. And I probably told it to you recently, but now is the time to tell it again. Okay? The Frierdiker Rebbe, the Zelta mice. If he tells the story, I think it was Reish and Dalet. I could be wrong about the year. I have to be careful because people call me up and correct the mistakes that I make in stories. Most of them say, oh, Baruch Hashem, that's the only mistake. That's the only mistake I made. The only mistake. I make a lot of mistakes. It's impossible not to. Shkiyas mi yav. But anyway, I think it was Reish Dal, the year after the Bar Mitzvah. Lubavitch was still small. Lubavitch very quickly became gigantic. Once there were a lot of people in Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab's Hanhoga changed. He became, his exposure to the public was much more controlled. When it was a smaller olam, and of course the people around were more Pneumistic people. When Lubavitch was not popular, the only people who were in Lubavitch were people who really had a chush and emes. So the Rebbe Rashab was more, when I was a child, my father davened in shul. When I grew up, my father went home to daven. He didn't daven in shul, because there were too many people watching him. So there's a story. There was once a Shabbos Test Kislev. Yud Kislev, a Sunday Shabbos. Said, just like when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, there was also Shabbos and Sunday, Test Kislev, Yud Kislev. And I've told this to you many, many times. The Rebbe had a seder, the Rebbe Rashab, that he would come to shul to hear Kader Kedusha Baruch. He would be by Pshas Minyan, and then he would daven Barichas, daven Kedaki B'Kodesh, and he would finish around Lichbetchen time, the winter time. You understand? It was a short Shabbos. As soon as he finished Shacharis, he would make Kiddush. He would eat a little bit of Mezainis. Then he would bench. And then he would have a Mincha. And after Mincha, he would wash. Right by the Shkia, the Rebbe would wash. And once he washed, the Sukkah could be Nimshach late into the night. I mean, he wasn't bound by Ma'ariv constraints and Havdalah constraints. This is also halachas. But again, it's a minyan kavua, and somebody has to remind you, right? But that was the Seder by the Rebbe Rashab. He would daven Shacharis till about Mincha time. He would make Kiddush, eat Mezainis, the Suda Shniyah. Then he would daven Mincha and wash. In other words, he ate Shalosh Sudas. And he would fabreng. Sometimes it was shorter, sometimes it was longer. Because it was Tes Kislev, so the Chassidim came to be with the Rebbe. When I say Chassidim, we're talking about the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidim. In Lubavitch, you had a few regulars who lived in Lubavitch. The most famous personality from that group was Reb Hendel, Chaneich Hendel Kugel. Then there was Rashbat, who was the Rebbe Rayatz's tutor. And there was Abba Person. Abba Person was also a famous personality. He was a grandson through marriage of a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, the Velvel Levelenker. That's his claim to fame. He was a big chassid. And there were others. Anyway, it wasn't 25 people. It certainly wasn't 500 people. It was a few chevre. And they came and they participated in the Suda Shabbos of the Rebbe Nishmas Yed. They were just daven the ganzen Shabbos. And of course, the story was that the Rebbe was talking. The Rebbe Rashab was young. They were 30 years older than the Rebbe Rashab. They may have been older than the Rebbe Marash. But the Rebbe Rashab was the Rebbe and they were Chassidim. So there was a Fabrengen. This one spoke. But the Rebbe was the Reish HaMedaber, the Rebbe Rashab. And it was the Mittel Rebbe's Yemaledes, birthday. The Mittel Rebbe's Yortzeit, Histalkus, Hilula. So he talked about the Mittel Rebbe and the Mittel Rebbe's Chassidus. Understand that then they only had 10 Sfarim of the Mittel Rebbe. We have 30 Sfarim of the Mittel Rebbe. We have access to much more Chassidus than those Chassidim had from the Mittel Rebbe. And he was being mafsed the Mittel Rebbe's Chassidus, the Mittel Rebbe's Fanem. The richness, the detail. And of course, you're speaking in Yoni Askoli, speaking about Seichel Eliki. So there was always the spillover into the Avodah, these ideas, how they translate into the practical life of a person. During the course of the afternoon, it went on for a few hours, there was also stories told. The Rebbe Rashab told stories, there were other people told stories, and the Friedrich used to run home after Shabbos and take out his notebook and write it all down. First he would write short notes, and then he'd come back and fill it in. The Rebbe Rayatz was a rabid writer. He wrote every day of his life. Every day of his life. In a Yuman, in a diary, in a Yoiman. A Togbuch. And he wrote a lot. Friedrich wrote. A Gewalt. Anyway, the word was that in the middle of the Fabrengen, some of the Chassidim were eating kasha. The Rebbe Rashab was talking about Yoni Seichel, and they eating kasha. That was what they served, kasha. So the Rebbe Gitazog, the Rebbe Rashab says that you have to be careful to discern, to separate the Gishmak from the kasha, from the Gishmak from the Chassidus. In other words, you're getting pleasure from Avot and Seichel Eliki. You're getting bread from Punta Taiva, kasha. What was the grace of Taiva? Had a little schmaltz. Maybe what sort of time? Kasha. What's kasha is a grace of Taiva. But nevertheless, so the Rebbe says that you have to appreciate the separation between this pleasure which comes from the Nefesh Elokis and this pleasure which comes from someplace else. And if I bring him on for hours, until 7 o'clock, 7:30. Shabbos was over 4:30, yeah? If I bring him finished, they benched, and they daven Ma'ariv. Maybe they went to shul, they daven Ma'ariv, maybe they had even a minyan, and everybody went home. The Friedrich was, they also went home. 11:30, many hours later, 3-4 hours later, I had a premonition. I had a feeling. And I walked into the Zal, and Rabbi Hendel was still davening Ma'ariv. Rabbi Hendel was a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Hendel. The way the Friedrich, he's called the Chanoich Hendel Kugel. He came originally from Kudenitz, I think, or Dokshitz, maybe both, Kudenitz, Dokshitz. He was a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek. The Friedrich Rebbe writes in his Rishimis, when describing Rabbi Chanoich Hendel, that B'chalal, as a rule, a person with a bigger mind has a bigger heart. A bigger mind is capable of deeper emotions. A person with a simpler mind isn't capable of very pronounced emotions. The Rebbe says, Rebbe Hendel gehat an einfache Kopf. Rebbe Hendel's mind was ordinary. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't extraordinary intellectually. But he had the heart of a big chassid. In other words, he somehow had feelings for the Eibishter and for a fellow Jew. that were so real, they were so powerful, even though he didn't have the seichel hamilid, and he didn't have the intellect to justify where those feelings came from, but he had the heart of a lion. He was a big chassid. His Avas Hashem and his Avas Yisrael. He died from Avas Yisrael. Right? He passed away from Avas Yisrael. There was a fire in Lubavitch, Takler, when it happened, and he stood in front of a row of burning houses, screaming at the top of his lungs, Yiddish Geld brennt. Jewish money is burning. And he passed away from Agmas Nefesh. And the Rebbe Rashab commented that Reb Hendel, where Reb Hendel is now, in Gan Eden, with the Rabbeim and the Chassidus and so on. Anyway, Reb Hendel was a very big chassid. He was a very important chassid. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes that when my father made Yeshivas Temchat Mimim, so the Mashpia Behei idea was Greinem. But the Mashpia, who was the Mashpia Rishon, was not Greinem. It was Abchanei Hendel Kugel, Abchanei Hendel. He was the first Mashpia. And the second Mashpia was the Rashbatz. The Frierdiker Rebbe walks into the Zal. The Fabrengen had finished 3 or 4 hours before. Now, how much time did it take David Maidev? I'm asking you. How much time? A Yid state Maidev, Motzei Shabbos Kedesh, 4 Shonach. There's enough tears to wash a table. He's pouring Gisach, a torrent of tears. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I sat down behind him, like the halacha is, and I waited to finish Maidev. It took another hour. After Chtzos, after midnight, in a winter dika Motzei Shabbos, Rabbi Hendel finishes davening Maidev. Hendel finishes Maidev, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, he turns around and he sees me. And now, of course, comes the interruption. Kedarkei B'Kodesh of the Frierdiker Rebbe. That Beklal, B'Chasidim Amol, there was a Mesiras Nefesh, Opgeben Zich Mit Junge Leid. There was an incredible now understanding that older Chassidim had to give of themselves to the younger Chassidim. Like it says in the Akdama, Sefer Tanya Kadisha, in Mizonish Pravinen, Nivas Shiflas Shel Sheker. They say the Shin Midrai Kepalach. Shiflus Shel Sheker, Shif Shin Shin Shin. And Reb Hendel was God gave the chassid. And you're talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe adds, and the younger Leitum gehat Mesiras Nefesh zu Herren by the Eltern Zog. And the younger Chassidim had the understanding that they have to put Udin in the Sham and apply their ears to listen what they're being told and to have a bittul to receive. So Reb Hendel walks up to me, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, his eyes are swollen. You could think the world came to an end. And he pokes me in the chest. Hersh Yosef Yitzchak, he called him by his name. I think he called him by both names. He says, the Haskalah. He was talking about the Fabrengen that had taken place a few hours before. That's called the deep Seichel, the philosophies that the Rebbe Rashab had discussed at the Fabrengen. That's called. Hab ich nicht verstanden. So I didn't understand. He says, wer bin ich zu verstehen? Ich hab nicht die Hose. I don't have the chutzpah to complain. How come I don't understand? I don't have the mind for it. But the sipurim, he says, the stories. You hear one story and a second story and a third story and your heart remains cold. This is after 5 hours of mind. How much can a person, how long can it take to say words? I'm asking you a question. He says, this hab ich recht. He says, I demand I shouldn't have a leva ever, and you go to such a fabrengen, and you hear such sipurich sinim about avodas Hashem, and your heart remains cold. This is not acceptable. And this is the quote: "Weil a bissel Yiddish heart kumt jeder." A bissel Yiddish heart, a little Jewish heart, everyone's entitled to. And this I'm demanding. This was, in other words, his lament after that Maidev was that he heard sipurim about Anyoni Avoida from Chassidim from earlier times. Handle whether it's a tzedek. So if he was hearing stories about Chassidim from earlier times, I mean, Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, Chassidim of the Middle Rebbe, Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he says, the fact that I heard such stories and they didn't move me, this I'm upset about. Why? I'm entitled. A bissel Yiddish hearts, a little Yiddish hearts, kumt yedin. When I teach this to my students, this is the quote, this is the phrase that underscores this second klal gadol. A bissel Yiddish hearts. A person wants to have a relationship with him. The story is it's the same toich and advarim, but just a little bit of different form. A chassid came to the Tzemach Tzedek, and he complained. If those of us who live in America can't understand how married people could live this way, we don't understand we don't understand that world. Yesterday I was praying with the girl, praying the whole day long, and I don't know what I said, but one of the girls asked me, why don't we do it like this way now? And I opened up big eyes and I looked at her and I said, really? Why? Why? It was a whole different universe. And in terms of Yiddishkeit, it was Shalei Be'erech. In terms of Nisyonis, we're Shalei Be'erech. But in terms of Yiddishkeit, it was a different world, So, a chassid came into the Tzemach Tzedek and complained. He says, Rebbe, I'm a Lubavitcher. I get up early, I go to the mikveh, and I sit down to learn Chassidus. And I learn Chassidus for whatever number of hours. I heard from somebody, I hope I repeat this correctly, that the Friedrich Rebbe told Rabbi Saul Jacobson that Chassidus fahren darf nach sein 6 Show. Chassidus before that, he says, has to of 6 hours. 2 hours, you have to forget Chizah the Hayalma, especially a person like Rabbi Jacobson, who was so involved in that class. Forget about the world. 2 hours, you have to put yourself into understanding Elikus. And then 2 hours, you have a shtickle gefeel for Elikus. I hope I'm repeating it correctly, but I heard such a word at the Friedrich Rebbe told Rabbi Jacobson. I may be saying the numbers were wrong. I may be saying the 3 categories. I remember that there were 3 categories, and that the first one was to forget about the world. The Teuchen is richtig, but the Pratim Gedenke, I don't remember it, I forgot even from whom I heard it. This story I heard, I didn't see in print. Anyway, back to the first story. A chassid comes into the Tzemach Tzedek, he says, I get up in the morning, I came Vaser. That was the expression Chassidim used to go into the mikveh. And he learns Chassidus, whatever, not 15 minutes, hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. Then like 1,000 tefillin. And you're supposed to think Chassidus and 1,000 tefillin, like it says in the Rebbe's letter. The Friedrich Rebbe has a letter where he describes the Fabrengen with the Rebbe Rashab. 9 miles, I think, in thinking Chassidus and 1,000 tefillin, how it changes. It is a very special advantage of thinking Chassidus and 1,000 tefillin. He says, then I started daven. Und es daven sich nicht. I don't daven. Now, I was not in that room. I don't know that person. But I'm going to tell you practical. You know what happened? He ran out of energy. I mean, at some point the body, you know how much koyach it takes to learn for 3 hours? How much koyach it takes to concentrate for an hour or 2 after that? He was worn out. He wasn't infinite. He didn't have believable koyachas. He wasn't one of those Jews who can draw strength from the work that he was doing. That's a tzaddik. The harder he works, the more awake he is. But most people, it's not that way, So he comes into the Tzemach Tzedek and he complains. He says, I do everything good, and when it comes to the davening, daven tzchnish. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, that's one of the famous Chassidish quotes. The Tzemach Tzedek told him, "Was hart is dir as du davenst fahren davenen? Why is it a concern of yours that you daven before you daven?" That's the quotable quote. So here we have a similar situation. The Chassid wants to be a Oived Elokim. And of course, the elementary definition of Oived Elokim is he wants to find what is Yetzer Hara. He wants to be a Balabayas over himself, a Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa. He should control his thought, both in Sur Meran Asay Tev. He should control his speech, both in Sur Meran Asay Tev. And he should control his Asiyah in Sur Meran Asay Tev. This is his wish, this is his desire, this is his ambition, this is his hope, this is his preoccupation. It doesn't sein Leben. And to this end, he learns Chassidus. And to this end, he thinks Chassidus. And to this end, he wants to daven with a gefil, with a hearts, with a certain set of feelings, of emotions that are going to affect the rest of his day. I don't know what's going to be left of his day when he's finished with the schedule, but whatever's left of the rest of his day. He says, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. The motor doesn't turn up. It doesn't happen. The Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem do not happen. So the Alter Rebbe says, you should know a Klal Gadol. And it's a simple Klal Gadol. Right? How do you say it in English? What's the point? We're Americans, what's the point? What's the bottom line? The bottom line is to be a Neder L'Chidit. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is to be fruit. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you went through all of these steps and you did not turn over the engine, you didn't achieve the maximum level of Beinani, take a look at the actions. If the actions are the way they're supposed to be, then you have a Bissel Yiddish. Then you have enough inspiration from your davening to carry over into your life. If the actions are not the way they're supposed to be, so then there's something wrong with the gefeel, you understand? If I don't have feelings of Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem that are complete, that are wholesome, but if I have enough to affect my machshava, dibur, umaiseh, that's also a beinani. Because the whole point of all of the learning and all of the contemplating is the action. And that's the second Klal Gadol. Last week's Klal Gadol was that even the highest Beinoni, the point of it all is action. This week's Klal Gadol is, as long as there's action, that's a proof that the Bissel Yiddish Ahatz, this is the quote that we're going to use throughout, the necessary feelings that are enough, that are sufficient for controlling one's thought, speech, and action are in place. And this is one of them. Whatever level of Beinoni it is, it's Beinoni. Okay? I'm going to stop now. We're going to break for a moment. And next week we're going to come back to this. The word in the Tanya is Kach Yossi. Kach Yossi means I'm entitled. Kach Yossi is the same lashon that Rabbi Hendel used. A bissel Yiddish Ahatz kumt jeder. Kachas, I'm entitled. I'm entitled. And if I'm entitled and I don't have, I'm bechatayne. And the Alter Rebbe says, if the machshava dibur and ma'aser are in order, you have. That's the exchange. That's the pilp. Okay, let's break.